Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Slouching towards Thatcham Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Tim. Every week I chat with a fellow parents blogger and we each read one of our favourite posts, bringing you bite-sized chunks of blogging brilliance in audio form. It's like tucking into an expensive box of chocolates, but without the calories. This week I'm saying hi to Tracey, who writes the blog Mummyshire. Hi there, Tracey.
Hi, hello.
So just to start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Hi, I'm Tracey. I'm a 40-something mother, and we recently relocated from London up here into the Shires. We relocated with two small children. At the time, actually, my boy was just 7 weeks old, so it was quite scary, and my other girl is 3. And missing London, but loving the countryside, so totally torn between the two. My girl is now 8, so she's bordering on the pre-tween and don't know it.
Yeah, so like me, you're an ex-Londoner who's moved out of the city. So what was it that prompted the move?
I think, like quite a lot of people, my daughter was getting ready to go to school, and schools. But it would have involved staying on a tube maybe, not being able to scoot to school. And we wanted a garden. Our family was expanding, so we had to look further afield. We found our place in Thame. We did a bit of a tick box exercise. Place with it's leafy, the park, good schools. We could afford a garden. But we probably didn't really think about the emotional side of moving. So when we moved, say my boy was 7 weeks old, but didn't have any friends here. I didn't have an NCT group here. And I was very much, whilst we had the house, we didn't really think about all the other emotional things that go with moving. And that's really how my blog came about, just talking about the differences between London and being out here in the countryside and being a mummy in the Shire.
Okay, so let's move on to your blog. How did Mummyshire come about, and what sort of stuff do you typically write about?
It started when I was only a few months into living out here in Thame, and our washing machine broke down. And I suddenly thought, I have no one to talk to, I have no one to ask. The people I know are all in London, which weren't really very helpful. And that really put me to think about, well, what the difference is and how need to connect myself to a new community. So it's a whole new community, which seemed to me that everybody knew everybody else, and I was the complete outsider. So that's really how it came about, just looking at what it's like to relocate with two small children.
That's great. So finally, before we move on to the post that you're going to read for us today, can you just give us a little bit of background to it?
The background to this post is that whilst I was pushing Luke in the pushchair into town one day, people just stop and say things to me, which was lovely. However, it involved race in some point, because we're a dual heritage family. My parents are from the Caribbean. Sean, my husband's parents, are from Somerset. And there are not many of us dual heritage families in town. So I suppose we do stand out a bit. So I've had a few comments, and then I went out with some friends, some newfound friends, to a bar, and I had even more comments. And it just made me think, this really is a point of difference between living in London and living out in Oxfordshire. And I had to stay calm, and that's really how it all came about.
Okay, so in that case, I will hand it over to you now. So this is Tracey reading Staying Calm.
Thank you. Staying calm. If I'm told one more time that my boy looks like Bruno Mars, or that I should be good at dancing, I don't think I will remain calm. Michelle Obama made a beautiful speech earlier in the week. It's the only time the First Lady has talked about race. I don't mean when it's big and shouty and blatantly obvious, but the everyday underlying comments. She called it microaggressions. I don't believe people always mean what they say. I'm an internal optimist. But they do say things that don't always feel great. We're a dual heritage family now living in the Shires, having left London a few years ago. Since the move, I've been told, with that hair, your boy is a spitting image of, insert name of the most popular dual heritage boy of the time. Or that he has the same skin as Michael Jackson. Really, words fail me still. He obviously doesn't. Or when we're asked if we're lost because we couldn't possibly live here. Or when my daughter's told she can't play with people because she has curly hair. Or when the adult at playgroup sees my boy and immediately puts on a bad boy swagger, lets out a few yo-yo-yos, and asks him to do a high five. None of the other boys get this treatment. And let me tell you, if you're going to start a conversation with, "I'm not racist or anything but," whatever then comes out of your mouth is inappropriate. Wrong. Just don't say it. Ever. Sometimes I wonder, am I being too sensitive? Am I putting racism where it shouldn't be and mistaking ignorance for friendly banter? Would this be happening in London, or is it just because we're in the Shire? No, I'm being realistic about life here in the Shires. I'm sure the people who have said these things would be horrified if I told them what they were saying was inappropriate, but sometimes it just is. I'm not saying living in London is idyllic, but what it does have is diversity. People look at you for who you are and not what stereotype tells them you ought to be. But is it my job to rebut or educate against ignorance? I never thought so. However, now that I have the children and they're becoming more aware of people's language, I find myself speaking out. I remain calm on the outside, but inside, sometimes I'm fuming, because there are certain negative stereotypes around being a person of colour, which, if reinforced, can constantly chip away at your confidence. Just ask Michelle Obama. It came to a head recently at a local bar with some friends. That night I was told by various, what I'd say youngish people, I had to be good at dancing because I was black. I was asked where was I really from, and informed I should sound more black. What does that even mean? I could go on. Maybe I have to ignore these comments and assume people have only been exposed to those within their immediate sphere of influence. But is that a valid argument in this day and age, where diversity is seen across our TV screens, gaming screens, and about our sports, so making their comments more sinister, even if it isn't seen on their local streets? And what hope for my children? Do I constantly need to be rebuilding their confidence as they're subjected to a hail of microaggressions from such an early age? Some people may think I'm being overly sensitive, and nothing is meant of these comments, that I need to get thicker skin. But the comments don't hurt me, they just constantly surprise. I am remaining calm whilst looking for answers.
Thanks, Tracey. It's such a shame that you and the kids still have to put up with nonsense like this at times, even if much of it isn't intentional. We're a dual heritage family too, and I would hate my kids to have to endure some of what both you and I have had to put up with. I guess while the Shires are gradually increasing in diversity over time, they're certainly not yet the same type of cultural melting pots that London and our other big cities tend to be. So, I do think our lives and our kids' lives are surely that much richer for being exposed to a variety of different heritages, not just their own.
Totally, and that's why we still keep our connections to London. I mean, we know people here who only go to London maybe once a year, if that. But for us, I think it's very important that we do keep those connections going, that the children do see a diversity of people and experiences too. But I suppose it also helps that obviously my parents are from the Caribbean and we have an extended family, so we do have a big melting pot within our own family as well. But yes, I agree with you. I do think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. We're the same. We still regularly travel into London to give the kids that breadth of experience that you can get in a big city like that. So Tracey, thanks very much for taking the time to join me on this week's podcast.
Not at all. Thank you very much for inviting me.
If you want to read more of Tracey's writing, go to mummyshire.com or follow her on Twitter @mummyshire. I'll attach blog and social media links on the show notes over on slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. Like Tracey, I lived in London for a long time, but moved out of the city with work, and am now about an hour outside London. I don't have any great desire to live in the city again. Given the choice, I'd move back to Oxford in a heartbeat, but I do like being able to get in fairly easily for days out with the kids whenever the mood takes us. So here's a post I wrote during the Easter holidays last year about a particularly good trip into London with Isaac and Toby. 5 modes of transport, 3 boys, 1 brilliant day. A day out in London riding the Underground? Military campaigns have been planned in less detail than this. I've had some fantastic days out with my kids in the past, but a day out in London this week with Isaac and Toby had all 3 of us agreeing that this was our best trip ever. That's not hyperbole, it's what both boys said independently to me during our drive home at the end of an exhausting but exhilarating day. Isaac and Toby are different in many ways. Our oldest son is all about words, and lots of them, whether spoken or written, whereas our middle child is more reflective, and as likely to draw a picture of something as he is to write about it. However, they're united in their love of the London Underground, travelling on it, the engineering behind it, and memorising the complex interconnection of stations that make up the network. This trip had been 3 weeks in the planning. Objectives were determined, photo opportunities were deemed important, lists of stations to visit were drawn up, routes were mapped out, contingency plans were put in place. And that was before I even got involved. These boys could teach the army a thing or two about logistics planning. In the end, I was forced to intervene to whittle down what would have been an ambitious week-long itinerary into something achievable in a day. And even then I ended up cutting out some elements on the day. What we did manage was a day with 5 modes of transport: car, underground, cable car, DLR, and London taxi. Some lessons about different styles and ages of stations, and their various engineering challenges. The boys are serious geeks when it comes to the tube. And plenty of sightseeing, as I deliberately took them to places they had never visited before, but in many cases were already familiar with, from books, TV, and films, giving them plenty of opportunities to get busy with their cameras. So our day took in the O2, and some elevated views of London from the Emirates airline cable car across the river. We saw several of London's modern buildings: Canary Wharf, the Walkie-Talkie, the Shard, the Gherkin, and the Cheese Grater, and some of its oldest and most iconic landmarks, such as St Paul's Cathedral and the Tower of London. We walked across Tower Bridge. The boys were fascinated to see the hinges where the bridge folds up, and the not-so-old Millennium Bridge. And we swung by Paddington Station to check out where a bear from darkest Peru first met the Brown family, and go shopping at the Paddington store in the process. It was a long day for all 3 of us. Having left home before 8 a.m, we didn't return until 8 p.m, but the boys loved every minute of it. Even poor Toby, whose little legs were so worn out by mid-afternoon that at one stage he was shuffling along behind me, glassy-eyed and with the gait of an extra from The Walking Dead. But after one final stop for dinner at the motorway services, the boys were still merrily chatting away on the drive home and recording their own video diaries of the day. We've already agreed that we will do another boys' day out in London like this during the summer holidays. We'd better get cracking on the planning though. We've got a tough act to follow. And that's it for this episode of the Slouching Towards Thatcham podcast. You can follow me on Twitter @ThatchamDad and on various other social media channels. You'll find links to all of these, plus Tracey's links, in the show notes over on slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. But before I go, I've got one final announcement to make. This is also the last episode of the Slouching Towards Thatcham podcast, at least until it's relaunched next week as the new, bigger and better Meet the Parents podcast. Join me and a team of mums and dads every week for family-based chat, bringing you real stories from real parents on both sides of the fence. You'll be able to follow us on Twitter @ParentsPodcast, on our new website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and in various other places online. So please do give us a follow on social media, and join us next week for even more parenting podcasting. Until then, goodbye.